On the bench today, we've got the brand new two-wheel drive Team Corally Syncro. There's more new to this car than you might think, and if it turns out to be any good, this could be the best two-wheel drive basher you can buy. Today, we're going to be tearing this thing apart, putting it to the test, and then maybe making it four-wheel drive just to see how it does with some upgrades. Starting with the body, the two-wheel drive Syncro has a brand new paint scheme, and it's a little bit busy, but I honestly think it looks really good. As with all Team Corally cars, the body is fairly thick Lexan. These bodies are usually pretty durable and don't generally need reinforcement. As you can see, we have body tethers and nice big body pins. Team Corally has not gone the clipless route yet, and whether or not you think that's a good thing just depends on your personal preference. The front body mount hole is just a standard circle, but we do have a slot in the back. That allows for flex in the chassis without ripping the body up, and those holes are connected to nice beefy body mounts that are integrated into the rear tower and the front tower. The front tires appear to be the same as on the four-wheel drive Syncro, but the rear tires are really wide. I'm really happy to see that Team Corally decided to put wider rear tires on this truck because obviously with a two-wheel drive vehicle, especially one as powerful as this, traction is always going to be a problem, and these super wide rear tires should definitely help with that traction problem. It's really nice to see they accommodated the two-wheel drive platform with these wider tires. However, interestingly, we've gone back to the non-serrated nuts. That's a little sad to see because these wheel nuts do fall off, so we'll definitely be putting some thread lock on these wheel hexes. I was doing some research online and there aren't really a lot of options for 1/8 scale or even 1/10 scale two-wheel drive basher buggies. Traxxas has the Bandit VXL, but that's actually quite a bit smaller and it's pretty expensive for what you get. Arrma previously had the Boost vehicles in their 3S line, but I haven't really seen those available very much, so I think they might be in the process of discontinuing them. Let me know down in the comments if you've seen those available anywhere. But other than those vehicles, in general, there really aren't any good options for two-wheel drive buggies, so this is a great thing to see. On these Team Corally vehicles, the wheels are vented, but the tires aren't. I really would like to see them start venting their tires, as most other manufacturers are going to vented tires, and they definitely are beneficial over just having the wheels vented. As you can see here, just like the four-wheel drive version, we have an integrated plastic rear shock tower, and that's matched with a plastic front shock tower, though they are reinforced. As you can see here, we do have composite threaded body shocks. There are aluminum threaded caps on here with composite ends. And removing the shock cap, we can see that these are bladder style shocks. And one thing I find really interesting is that on all of these 4S cars, they use really thick shock fluid. It seems to work fine, but it is thicker than pretty much anything out there. Though this should work really well for landing big jumps, which we'll be checking out in just a few minutes. And now pulling this rear unit off, you can see that the wing mount is integrated into the shock tower, and the body mount is separate, but it's also basically integrated. These new rear wings are a lot more flexible than the old ones used to be, and coupled with a better mounting system, these don't seem to break nearly as often as their old ones did. Whether or not we'll end up breaking this one, we'll just have to find out. Underneath that, you can see we have the little mini aluminum reinforcement piece. As with most things Team Corally, this is a nice machined piece of aluminum, and definitely doesn't look cheap, even though this car is a budget car. And now pulling the D block off, again, you can see we have a nice looking piece of machined aluminum here. This is going to be 6061 aluminum, but at least it's not plastic. Those are going to be holding in decently beefy hinge pins. And taking that hinge pin out releases a whole bunch of spacers. I'd actually really like to see Team Corally get away from these spacers. Most bashers aren't going to be adjusting the wheelbase of their car. And if they got rid of the spacers, they could actually make the arm a little bit longer, making it even stronger than it already is. One thing I wanted to mention about these arms, and pretty much all arms, is that this seam is not actually a seam in the plastic. This is just where the two halves of the injection mold come together. So this is not inherently a weak point. The reason it often will break right there is because that's the point of highest stress. When the arm takes a hit from the front or the rear, it's going to be putting a ton of pressure right there. And so that's where it will likely end up splitting. But that line doesn't really denote a weak point in the plastic. In the rear, we can see they have their standard steel stub axles. I'm curious to see what the front looks like. And then connecting those to the rear differential are some decent looking dog bones. As you can see with this differential cover, we do have the option for a sway bar, though this doesn't come with one. It is nice to see the options there, though. Underneath that, we've got the rear differential. This has their standard output cups. These are different than the spring steel ones you'll see on the Kagama. These are reasonably durable, though they do tend to wear a bit faster than those really nice spring steel ones do. Pulling the differential apart, you can see that we have a fluid-filled sealed diff. All of the gears are going to be sintered steel. On their higher-end machines like the Kagama, they actually have CNC machined ring and pinion gears. And like a lot of parts, you can actually upgrade this car to those gears if you want. Being two-wheel drive, I don't expect to see a differential in the front, though being from a four-wheel drive platform, I'm really curious to see what they put in its place. And I'm also curious to see just how easy it's going to be to convert this thing over to four-wheel drive, because that might be a really cool upgrade path for people who want to buy the cheaper vehicle and then make it better in the future. While I'm screwing this back together, if you're having a good time, why don't you let me know by hitting that subscribe button? The grease Team Corally is using is kind of interesting. It's a bit more waxy than I'm used to feeling, and I'd say it's somewhere between really nice high-end grease and something that was scooped out of the bottom of a machine in China. Overall, not bad. Like I said, I'm really curious to see what's going on in the front, but before we do that, we need to take a look at these electronics, because there's one thing here that's really new and really cool. I'm not talking about the servo. It's the same 7225 Metal Gear servo we've seen before. And I'm not talking about the motor. That's the same Curon 725 4S motor. I'm talking about the brand new Pulse G2 135. This thing appears to be based on the 10BL120 G2 120 amp ESC, but with that 135 amp moniker, we actually get a beefed up 135 amps of output power, which is a really nice little upgrade. Along with the standard Team Corally owner's manual for the two-wheel drive Syncro, which has all the things you need in it to get going and to get repairing your vehicle if you break it, we get a bespoke manual for the ESC. You can see obviously it's waterproof, 135 amp and 2 to 4S compatible. And unlike some vehicles we've seen lately, there are a ton of programming options. We can choose how many LiPo cells we're running, a low, medium, or high LiPo cutoff voltage, ESC thermal protection, motor thermal protection, which is an interesting thing to see given that this is not a censored system. I'm not really sure how it would be doing motor thermal protection, but maybe it is. Motor rotation, BEC voltage can go up to 7.4 volts. It's at 6 volts right now, so we'll definitely be beefing that up. Brake force, reverse force, punch, and drag brake. And fortunately, we can program everything with the set button. It's kind of a pain, but it is doable on this ESC. Powering that, we're going to be using a battery in their standard battery tray. This tray is fairly decent. They did update it a while back, and it is less likely to break than it was before, though these straps do tend to break fairly easily. I have found that on the 4S battery, it's not too bad though. And then the connection to our battery is going to be handled by a genuine AMAS XT90, which is really nice and very universal. Because this is a two-wheel drive vehicle, they couldn't run a center differential. If they did, it would just bleed all the power off to the front. So we've got a brand new slipper clutch in here. Let's check it out. Removing that cover, you can see we do have a 13-tooth pinion gear. Team Corally did mention to some other people that they use this size of a pinion gear because this is designed to be a beginner car, though I still think they should go with 15-tooth out of the factory. I'm curious to see what this will do with the 13-tooth, but we will probably be upgrading. Pulling this cover off doesn't quite get us to the slipper clutch. We still need to take this little tower off, though. Things do look kind of cool in there. All right, now we should be able to get this apart. There we go, and this is the slipper clutch. This is really interesting. We have a plastic spur gear, which I don't think I've ever seen on a Team Corally car before. We do have sealed bearings on this, which of course we have sealed bearings all throughout the car. And then we have an interesting looking collar back here, which I think is for adjusting the slipper clutch. Let's pull this off and see what it looks like inside. I'm having to use these pliers on the adjustment collar because this isn't really how it's designed to be used. This is actually designed to be adjusted in the car with a screwdriver in the slots, which is very convenient for adjustment, but a little less convenient for taking it apart outside the car. That being said, pulling this off, we can see it is an aluminum nut, and then we've got a pretty beefy looking spring. And with that nut off, we can take the rest of the slipper clutch apart. This does look like a fairly decent slipper clutch. It's got friction material on both sides, which should mean it's going to work fairly well. But again, we'll only know when we bash, which we are going to do in just a few minutes. All right, guys, let me get all this put together. Then let's take a look at what they've done with the front end. First of all, let's see what they've done with these stub axles. Okay, so it looks like they're very similar to the four-wheel drive ones. They just don't actually have the drive part on them. This makes sense because if you're going to be upgrading to the four-wheel drive version, you're going to be getting new stub axles anyway. And this is a cleaner design than leaving those four-wheel drive parts in place. You can see here everything else is the same. We've got the same pillow ball style suspension and sealed bearings, as well as solid plastic steering links, which are just fine for bashing. When I finish putting all this together, I'm going to be using this Vibratite VC3 thread locker. This stuff's really nice because it's reusable. You just paint it onto the threads, let it cure, and then it'll stay there and allow you to take the wheel on and off without having to reapply the thread locker every time. Obviously, I would prefer to have serrated nuts, but I've used this before and it does work well. While I'm taking these front shocks off, we can take a little peek down here and see they have some sort of placeholder instead of the front differential. I'm definitely curious to see what that looks like. Hopefully we'll be able to just take it out and put a front differential in when we convert this over to four-wheel drive, which we're going to be doing in just a little bit. I actually really like this composite shock tower design. I think it's at least as strong as their aluminum shock towers, and so far I don't think I've seen a single person break one of these. That being said, if you have broken one of these on one of your 4S vehicles, let me know down in the comments. This buggy just comes with a small front bumper, though I think the bumper off the Punisher and the Kagama 4 will fit. Just like in the rear, the A-block is a nice piece of machined aluminum. This is definitely a step up from what you see in some of the competition and feels like a really quality part. And you can see we've also got a sway bar mount here on the front differential cover. And now removing that differential cover, we can see we've just got a little plastic plug in here. This is just designed to cover these holes where the bearings and outputs would normally go. There's another plastic plug back here in the back of the bulkhead where the input shaft would normally be. And overall, yeah, it does look like this could easily take a front differential. Being based on a four-wheel drive platform, I'm really curious to see how this two-wheel drive buggy handles. Let's get it put back together and go find out. All right, guys, fresh 4S pack, stock gearing. Let's see how she does. Yep, she definitely handles like a two-wheel drive. All right, here we go. Full throttle. She actually handles pretty well. Stops okay. Those wide rear tires are definitely helping. Let's get another full throttle pass. Full throttle. Nice. All right, let's try one more pass. See if we can get her a little bit faster. Full throttle. There we go. All right, that's full speed. Let's see what we got. She definitely likes to do donuts. All right, 37 miles an hour. That's actually pretty good for something like this. And whereas, of course, you could definitely have more power with a two-wheel drive vehicle, you're not going to be able to use all of the power if you have a ton of power. As you can see, this is already a little bit difficult to control. And that's just kind of the way it is with two-wheel drive vehicles. They tend to be a lot more difficult to control than four-wheel drive vehicles, simply because you're only driving the rear wheels, so it tries to swap ends a lot. Driving a two-wheel drive vehicle requires a lot more skill than driving a four-wheel drive vehicle, which is why I wouldn't necessarily think that this is a beginner vehicle, though it is a lot of fun so far and it feels pretty good. You just have to be judicious with the throttle, and especially without having a gyro, you really need to be careful with how you steer it, otherwise you're just going to be doing donuts like this. Of course, donuts are fun, and this does donuts really, really well. I do think these back tires are giving us a lot of grip, which feels really nice, and straight line performance feels pretty good. We can definitely throw up some good rooster tails. Being 4S, this thing's got a ton of power, and this 13-tooth pinion actually feels a lot more appropriate on this car than it does on the four-wheel drive car, because with the four-wheel drive car, you've got so much control that the 13-tooth pinion just feels really badly under geared. But with this, control is a lot less, so having a little bit lower top speed can definitely help keep things under control, and this thing does feel well controlled. Overall, it feels pretty good, and for a two-wheel drive vehicle, it's handling the really rough stuff well too. And yeah, this thing feels like a lot of fun. I was a little bit worried, being based on a four-wheel drive platform, that it was going to be problematic, because I tried the Boost vehicles from Arrma, and those were two-wheel drive vehicles based on four-wheel drive vehicles, and honestly, they didn't handle very well. Being a Team Corally car, I expected this would handle well, and actually on the grass, it's really slidey, especially in the gravel. But once you get onto dirt, which, you know, is what this is designed to be on, it feels really, really good. And throwing up some awesome rooster tails is a lot of fun. Yeah, this thing's great. Let's go find us a pile of dirt and see how it jumps. Being on gravel, this thing's really going to want to bounce all over the place, so we are going to have to be kind of careful with our driving, but oh yeah, it handles jumps all right so far. Yeah, she's going to be pretty hard to control on this terrain. And unlike a four-wheel drive vehicle, you can actually get this thing stuck if you're not careful. See if we can't get ourselves a little bit of a jump here. Kinda. All right, those piles of dirt were a little bit too rocky for this car, so let's see how she does off the regular ramp. This ramp can really send a car launching, especially for its size. Let's see what it does with this two-wheel drive. Not too bad. Of course, being two-wheel drive, you're gonna have less air control because again, you're only powering two of the wheels, so you're gonna have less reactive torque. Because of that, you're really more dependent on how you jump and how the car jumps in general. Let's see if we can get a good jump out of this thing. Oh yeah. Yeah, she jumps well. And even for having really stiff suspension, it does seem to handle over the rough stuff pretty well too. Team Corally is generally well known for their handling, so I'm really not surprised. And yeah, this thing jumps just fine for a two-wheel drive 1/8 scale buggy where jumping really isn't its forte. It likes to straighten out on its own and it lands pretty flat. Overall, I'd say this thing will jump just fine. Let's see if we can get one more jump out of her. Yeah, she's a jumper. I've got a couple packs through this now, and it is a lot of fun. These tires do better in dirt and sand than they do in grass, but they do okay on grass as well. With the 13-tooth pinion, 4S on this thing is plenty of power. I definitely recommend one of these 5800 milliamp hour SMC batteries. These things are fairly low profile, and they fit this buggy chassis and body really well. So far, I'm very impressed with the ESC and motor combo. Again, plenty of power, didn't get hot. With a 13-tooth pinion, I didn't really expect it to. But now the real party trick on this is that we should be able to convert it over to four-wheel drive. In order to do that, we're going to pull the parts we need out of this brand new Punisher 4. This is basically the same as the Kagama 4, and it's on the same platform as the Syncro. The parts we're going to be pulling out of here are the front differential, the center differential, the front center drive shaft, and the front CVDs. I believe all this is going to fit directly into the two-wheel drive Syncro. Of course, we're going to have to find out to be sure. If you wanted to do this conversion yourself, the best place to buy the parts would be on Jenny's RC. I checked on there and it looks like it would be about $90 for everything you need, which isn't too bad, and is actually pretty similar to the price between the four-wheel drive and the two-wheel drive versions of the Syncro. If you bought it off Jenny's, you would get the entire differential with the differential housing, so that's how we're going to swap it over on these cars as well. And now we can just pull this whole differential right out of here. Then I should be able to drop it as well as the arms, hubs, knuckles, and CVDs directly into this because the arms are the same length. There is one thing I want to do before I install them though, and that's add a little bit of heat shrink tubing to these pin retainers on the CVDs. I haven't had it happen to mine, but some people have had these pins get spit out, and I suspect it's because these retainers are just a single loop, and this little slit here gets lined up with the pin, and the pin gets spit out by centrifugal force. I've heard Team Corally are working on a solution, but for now, this should be pretty cheap and easy insurance against it happening on this one. That should work. Now let me do the same thing to the other side, get all this stuff installed, and I'll show you what it looks like. There we go, everything fit fine, though I did forget that the Punisher uses the wider hubs, so we're gonna have a bit wider wheelbase in the front than we have in the rear. If you do this, make sure you get the parts off the Syncro, not the Punisher, because they are different in some places. And now the last thing we need to do is go ahead and swap in this center diff. This is interesting. I actually didn't realize that the spur gear on the Syncro is smaller than the spur gear on the Kagama 4 and the Punisher 4. This makes sense because these are using bigger tires. This means we're going to have to go ahead and swap out this motor mount as well. But if you were using parts from the Syncro 4, you wouldn't have to do this. That being said, I really want to see what this thing drives like four-wheel drive, so let me get all this put back together and I'll see you outside. Aside from just ensuring this thing can be made four-wheel drive, the main reason why I made it four-wheel drive was so we could do a proper durability test. With four-wheel drive, we can get the maximum speed up so we can get some big air, so cue the durability montage. So there we go, guys, the new Team Corally Syncro two-wheel drive. This thing is definitely cool. I had a lot of fun driving it in two-wheel drive. Overall, it's a very durable platform, and at about $300 after the perpetual hobby recreation products coupon you can get, it's not a bad deal. Converting it to four-wheel drive is fairly easy if you decide you want to do that. Of course, you want to make sure you use Syncro 4 parts. I used Punisher 4 parts, and it kind of turned it into Frankenstein's monster, though it did still work. Under the hood, it's using pretty much all 6S drivetrain components, which means it's going to be very durable in the long run. I think this new ESC works really well, and you definitely get a lot for your money. That being said, I'm not entirely sure I know who this is for. Obviously, if you want a 1/8 scale two-wheel drive buggy, there aren't a ton of options out there for bashers, and now this is one of them. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend a two-wheel drive car for a beginner because it's going to be more difficult than a four-wheel drive car, though it is great for learning basic skills. If you buy this and end up wanting to convert it to four-wheel drive, you're going to spend basically what you would spend in addition to just get the four-wheel drive version of the Syncro to begin with. So for many people, I would recommend just buying the four-wheel drive version. Now that being said, again, for what this is, a two-wheel drive 1/8 scale buggy, it's an absolute beast. It's priced well, it's got great drivetrain components in it, a great power system, it handles well, the tires are cool, it looks cool. So if this is the kind of car you want, I would definitely recommend checking one of these out. And if this is the kind of channel you like, I'd definitely recommend checking one of these out.